Welcome to episode 172 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I am Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host Dalton Willie. Have a pair of MVPs now, as of about a half hour ago, over my shoulder. Dalton, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Breaking news: Jim
Okay.
Irsay died.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah, like just now, Adam Schefter announced Jim Irsay died in his sleep in the afternoon.
Oh my God! What a way to kick this episode off.
Yeah.
Jesus
So congrats
Christ.
on the MVP to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But sorry, as I was waiting for the pod to start up, I was like, well, let's see what's on Twitter. And that was the first thing. And I was like, well, wait a minute. So big sad for legendary Colts owner Jim Irsay and football legend.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy.
And now we're here to
not super old, right? Like,
no, he was born in 59. So what does that put him at? Like 65 or so?
Yeah, 65, 66 probably.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
So today we're going to discuss the contract that Jonathan Taylor was given by Jim Irsay and why that might be up for change. No, that's super insane.
On that cheerful note, we are going to talk about rookies. We mentioned this a couple weeks ago. After the NFL draft, at some point, we were going to talk about these rookies, their outlooks, how it affected some of the vets, where they landed. Instead of just going through ADP and talking about every guy, I picked out about 10 guys. We're going to do a underrated, overrated, or properly rated, and talk a little bit about each one of those and a couple of other prompts as well to kickstart some conversation. Before I forget, trying to say this at the beginning of shows now as opposed to only the end. You can follow us Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube Half Point Per Podcast so you can join us live for these shows. All that stuff at the bottom of your screen if you are catching this either live or after the fact on YouTube. Dalton, let's start us off. First topic here. The rookie who was helped the most by their landing spot. And I'm going to go excluding Travis Hunter. And with him, it's not really about the landing spot as much as we got the tell that I was talking about a couple days before the draft. Is it going to be a full-time receiver? Is it going to be more focused on cornerback? Well, we got the receiver talk for now. And so I think his ADP went from late first to probably second or third pick at worst in every single draft. So rookie helped most by landing spot, non-Travis Hunter addition.
Yeah. So I went through and I went back and forth on this pretty heavily on a few guys, but I really landed on Caleb Johnson for a couple of reasons. One, he was a scheme fit player and he fits really well in Pittsburgh's scheme.
Yep.
Two, they have a young and ascending offensive line, which I really like. Three, he has a really good offensive-minded coordinator in Arthur Smith, who's really good at getting the establish it pattern going for him. He comes into a backfield that's only him and Jaylen Warren, and I don't think anybody was projecting him to be a three-down back. Part of that is the Iowa situation where he's not going to catch passes there, but it's a pretty good fit between him and Jaylen Warren in the sense that they really have different skill sets and can both fit in that backfield pretty effectively. The only bad part about his landing spot is either it's Aaron Rodgers or God knows who playing quarterback for Pittsburgh this year. But long term, he's in a pretty good spot. He's in an offensive environment that yielded Najee Harris 5 straight seasons of 1,000 yards. And I don't see how Caleb Johnson's not a better player than Najee Harris is at this point. And it looks like a really good smash for him in value.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned him in the storyline leading up to the draft as probably the most scheme-dependent running back of any of the top guys, at least. And I'm with you that I do think, scheme-wise, he lands in a pretty good spot here. And then, not that the Steelers won't always have somebody else, because everybody always has multiple guys, unless you are Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. There's going to be somebody else in your backfield who matters most of the time. I don't know how long Jaylen Warren is for this team. It could just be this year and he's out of there. And Jaylen Warren is not a threat to completely take over the backfield and be an 80% to his 20%. But it's very possible the next guy they bring in to be the 1B is not as good as Jaylen Warren, because I do think he is a very good player. So that could help him get more work as soon as maybe his second year in the NFL. So I'm with you. It's a pretty good landing spot. A guy that I went with, and so I'm still not the biggest fan of this prospect, but just from a pure landing spot perspective, Jaden Blue went from a guy who I was not really even going to be thinking about in redraft, especially, and to a lesser extent, rookie drafts, to a guy that, because he goes to the Cowboys and he's got, Miles Sanders and Javonte Williams as the two guys in front of him, the two vets in front of him, not necessarily in front of him, but just the two vets in that room. I think he's got a great chance to get on the field right away. He's probably never going to be a high volume guy, but that's not really what he profiles to be anyway. So he's a very, very explosive player, probably a guy the Cowboys are going to try and dial up in the screen game and the short passing game. The argument that goes, well, there's really no receiver I like outside of CeeDee Lamb, kind of went by the wayside a little bit, because now they have George Pickens. They didn't have George Pickens when Jaden Blue first landed there. So there is at least another pass catcher who you feel pretty good about in this offense outside of CeeDee Lamb now. But I still think Jaden Blue is probably going to be a pretty involved part of this passing game. And I mean, they spent 2 picks on offensive linemen. The Cowboys offense, when healthy, is generally pretty good. They put points up. So I think this is a situation where I was probably thinking of him as like a 4th round dart throw, which I think is probably lower than his ADP before this landing spot. Now I think he probably moves up a whole round for me, like early 3rd, which is, I think, still maybe lower than consensus. But just for me personally, I still think he was helped a ton by this landing spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ideal landing spot because it's such a murky backfield. We haven't seen good Miles Sanders since his Philadelphia Eagles days. And Javonte Williams, do you know he hasn't reached 90 yards since 2020?
Like in a game?
Yeah. In a game.
I believe it.
His explosiveness is gone. His ability to break tackles, the things we liked about him coming into the NFL are all really gone.
Yeah, he was never the most explosive, but because he broke so many tackles, he could break off some big plays occasionally. Like there was the one play we remember where he was like dragging a guy like 10 yards.
Yeah, and when it comes to Jaden Blue, very explosive player. I thought he was really going to be a special teamer in the NFL because, I mean, the guy didn't have over 200 carries or 200 touches in his season at Texas. Evaluating that Texas offense is always a pain for the wide receivers and even for the running backs. And so to see him land with the easiest path to a starting job on any of the 32 NFL teams right now is exciting. It'll really be a question of, can he hold up, and is he a player who's ready to take on, a 220 touch season in Dallas?
And even if he's not, I mean, I think there were a lot of places he could have landed. You alluded to special teams where he wouldn't have even gotten 100 touches. He is definitely, like, if he's used like very early career Tony Pollard, that's still a lot better than it potentially could have been, depending on where he landed.
Yeah, I mean, for a 3rd round pick, he's the closest you can get to a starting opportunity for some of these later round draft picks.
Yeah.
On a Dallas team that for 2 years in a row, I've been like, it's got to be a running back at some point, right? And they finally did it. It's just not really who I expected to land there.
Yeah, I mean, this was a team where if they took one of the backs that we truly liked, like that guy would have blown up and been a probably top 6 pick in rookie drafts and would have been a redraft darling for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you put Quinshon Judkins here, and I would probably see people arguing that he might be the 2nd overall prospect off the board.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yep. Okay. Next up, the rookie hurt the most by his landing spot. I almost hate to go there after how the show started, but I'm gonna go Tyler Warren, tight end for the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, I guess we'll see on Anthony Richardson, but just as things stand right now, the QB situation as we know it is not good. I mean, Richardson averaged 11 and a half completions per game last year. If it so happens to be Daniel Jones at any point, he is sitting at a cool 10 touchdown, 13 interception split over his last 2 seasons. That's not 2 full seasons, but over his last 2 seasons when he's been in there. I just don't know how a guy who I like, he's a good prospect, good player, kind of a jack of all trades. Like you think of what's the name of the K-State tight end? Ben Sinnott.
Ben Sinnott.
He's kind of just like a Ben Sinnott on steroids, like good BH back, moved all over the place. I mean, Andy Kolnick used him in a lot of different ways at Penn State his last year. But even with all that said, how do you get this guy enough production to matter when you have Josh Downs, you have Michael Pittman, you have Adonai Mitchell, and you have Alec Pierce, and like none of those guys truly mattered in fantasy on a consistent basis last season. And now you add another pass catcher to this group where I think the tight end caught 11 passes there last year. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I'm sure he'll catch more. He'll be more productive than that. But this is a guy who's talented enough where if he ends up in the correct spot, he's being talked about as a top 15 redraft tight end. I've still seen him. He is still right now ranked as the tight end 1 on Fantasy Pros, and I just am not sure that I see it. And even if you're squinting and you're like, okay, maybe could he be like get some Taysom Hill value and be a guy who in short yardage gets used? Probably not with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor. And I mean, even if Daniel Jones again gets reps later in the season, like those are probably the short yardage options. So this is a very bad landing spot for a talented player, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I know all pre-draft cycle the Colts were connected to both tight ends. It's something they wanted. It's still kind of a head scratcher for me for where this team at and where the roster is at. I know they've had the worst rotation of tight ends you can think of. It's hard to even name most of the players that have played tight end for them, but it's really abysmal value for Tyler Warren because one, if this offense works right, Anthony Richardson's probably having like a 29 to 3,000 yard season passing wise, and is an explosive rusher and figures out some of the turnovers and the short yardage problems. But it's not going to be an offense that has massive passing volume. It's not going to be an offense we think is going to hit 45 or 5,000 yards this season. That's not the expectation for it. Like you said, Josh Downs has been a pretty prolific player in the short to intermediate game and even in the deep game. Yeah. Michael Pittman Jr. is the king of intermediate routes for this team. And Adonai Mitchell is the ass leader for fantasy points data. He has the most average separation per route run. It's a
I mean, and Alec Pierce had a fine year. And, you know, the mouths to feed thing, if the guy is more talented than the other guys, the cream will rise to the top. But I'm not sure that's true. Like Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, both extremely talented guys. Adonai Mitchell, not yet proven, but a talented prospect. And Alec Pierce, I think, is a solid wide receiver. So, and that's not even talking about Jonathan Taylor. So I think it's a combination of just a lot of guys and a lot of pretty good guys in a low volume passing offense.
Yeah. And so it's going to be hard to get there. Now, if Shane Steichen gets really creative, starts running some weird wildcat formation concepts with him, I don't see the value of that to the offense. Like you said already, this is an offense with a dynamic runner under center already. The problem is the offense has had passing game issues. I've seen the counter argument. Look at what Steichen did when he had Dallas Goedert. But that was a completely different offense that was running with a quarterback who could drop back and pass consistently, and they didn't have a ton of weapons at the start of Goddard's career with Steichen in Philly.
Yep. Agreed. And even when Philly, built up that offense and it became what it was still very much funneled to those three guys in the passing game: Devonta Smith, AJ Brown, and Dallas Goedert. It was those three guys. And it doesn't have to be that way for Tyler Warren to be relevant, but just in the grand scheme of things, like where he could have gone versus where he did, this is just not a situation that I think many of us like. What's your rookie who was hurt the most by landing spot?
This one felt cheap because I think the community might even be overreacting to it. It's rare. It's really rare you see a first-round wide receiver going in round 2 of rookie drafts, but that's exactly the case with Matthew Golden. whose
Yeah.
current average ADP is 202, which is kind of wild. But the landing spot is pretty objectively bad in Green Bay because I
That's
think
interesting. I'll talk about this. I actually kind of like the landing spot.
I think everybody doesn't want to play musical chairs with this wide receiver room another season and try to extract whatever the value is going to be. Um, Last season, do you know who led the Packers in yards last season?
It was Romeo Dubs, right?
It was, in fact, Dontavian Wicks, which
Well, did he lead them in yards or targets?
or sorry, targets, not
Okay.
yards. It's the drops that the drops were the problem. But this team didn't have 1,000-yard receiver. I thought we were right for the first 5 games of the season, and Jaden Reed was the guy. Jaden Reed is not, in fact, the guy. Now, Matthew Golden walks into an X receiver position that seems pretty open, but rotationally, this Matt LaFleur offense has not run any wide receiver at the same position consistently. They continually rotate guys in and out. When he was the best player on the field, Jaden Reed still wasn't seeing 2 wide receiver sets. And I mean, the best situation for this, and maybe it's why I have him as a bad landing spot, is that it's a swan song for Dontavian Wicks, and he's not seeing the field as frequently anymore, and Matthew Golden is taking it over. But I just don't love it because I can't confidently say we're going to get to see him out there as their wide receiver 1. And I still have some questions. We haven't seen the expected Jordan Love ascendancy after his good first year under starter. Last year, a ton of injuries really derailed him, but it's a lot. And then the final thing I'll say is Matthew Golden also profiles a lot like this wide receiver room in that his production at Texas was pretty poor until the end of his career. And we're making a lot of assumptions about what he can do, which is the same thing that we had to do with Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Dubs. And that's always a concern for me.
So I'll just jump ahead. So Matthew Golden was one of the guys that we had listed. Overrated, underrated, properly rated. I said properly rated. And I think depending, like I've seen him early second. The ADP I pulled has him wide receiver 3 and number 9 overall. So he's like late first, early second, and I'm fine with that. And I think why I don't hate the fit, I understand just the general Packer concern of just not knowing what's going to happen. But I think he actually really fits what this team needs. Now, is he the number 1 receiver that Josh Jacobs said they need to bring in? No, he's probably not that. But they need that big play vertical element without Christian Watson this year. And I'm assuming he's going to miss pretty much this whole season with his injury. I think he's a pretty good compliment to Dubs and Reed, and I mean, I guess Wicks if he's out there, which I'm sure he probably will be.
If
some
Wicks can catch, he would be a wide receiver 1.
Well, a pretty important part to being a receiver, as it turns out, is actually
he can
catching
run
the
the
ball.
Routes, Evan. I won't take Wicks slander on this rookie pod.
So the thing that I like about Golden, you look at his reception perception profile, he is really good on deep routes. He's good on deep digs, posts, corners, and 9 route. He's got very good and strong hands. And I think both he and Jaden Reed could use a true number 1 to kind of work off of. But in reality, a lot of offenses don't have that. So I do think that having 2 guys like that, I think those guys can work off of each other and be a good fit next to each other. I mean, he's very good against zone coverage. I would say about average against man and press. One thing that stood out to me reading his profile, I'll read this direct quote from Matt Harmon. Any coach of the McVay tree will absolutely love watching Golden run dig and post routes against zone coverage. He gets wide open and is a dynamic threat in those patterns. That was before we knew landing spot. Last I checked, Matt LaFleur of that tree. So that fit just has me interested. We'll see how it actually shakes out with the depth chart, but there is reason to think, projecting the skill of the player and the need of the team that it could work.
Yes, and I did have him properly rated in ADP.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's at a fine spot. It's weird that a player taken this high on a team that we know needs wide receiver needs isn't like consensus top 4.
Yeah.
And like if he had been a Bill, I probably would have been higher on him in all honesty because of the certainty in that, or they wouldn't have done it. But a Raider, even, I would have been a little more interested in his fits there. Here, I'm just concerned that what LaFleur took from the McVay coaching tree was what they do with running backs, but he's trying it with wide receiver, where he's like, we're going to trot out so many guys, you're not going to know what's going on. Unfortunately, I think it means their quarterback doesn't always know what's going on the field.
It's possible. It also means that if you guess right, there is potentially value to be had in this room this season. Okay, I'll let you go first on this one here. Favorite under the radar rookie.
I'm surprised this player hasn't gotten more hype, considering the landing spot and considering the early breakout score he has, and considering the fact that when he played, he had electric stats and he played in a Power 5 conference. I'll let you guess that player real quick, since I did a little who's that Pokemon with my interest.
I have no idea.
It's Trey Harris. So we have
I thought about him. Like the profile, like from a number standpoint, I don't super love the player. I don't hate the player, but I don't love the player. So that's why I couldn't quite get him here.
Well, and I wasn't a big fan of Trey Harris, but he's getting no love in the streets right now. And he walks into a team that made us re-believe in Quentin Johnston year 2 for a good part of last season. A team with massive needs in the pass catching core. Right now, Orandre Gradson, the tight end they drafted in round 4, is getting a lot of hype on Twitter, but not Trey Harris, the rookie they took. He's a great compliment to Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey can do anything on the field, but last year the Chargers really used him in intermediate and short routes for the most part.
Yeah, and reminder, Josh Palmer, who is just a guy, but was their second best guy, not there anymore.
Yeah, he's a Bill.
Yep.
That's how just a guy he is. But Trey Harris walks into a spot where he could be the vertical X receiver, which is what he profiled as for a team that needs a vertical X receiver. I watched, these have been coming out, but like every clean pocket pass of 20 plus yards by X quarterback. I watched all of Justin Herbert's, who incredible quarterback.
Yeah.
Maybe 8 drops from Quentin Johnston on that, where they were dots from him. So it's a team that's willing to do it. It's a team also that, despite a lot of claims, had the highest pass rate under that coaching tree since going back to Colin Kaepernick, clearly utilizing their quarterback skill set, clearly wanting to open up that offense more with the way they approach it.
As they should. Yeah. Maybe they'll run a little more this year because, I mean, their running back room was J.K. Dobbins and then Gus Edwards, and that's really about it.
All had a wheel route touchdown.
So the running back room looks a little bit better this year, but yeah, like the narrative that they weren't going to throw was always crazy because when you have Herbert as your quarterback, you're going to play to that.
But yeah, I just don't understand why Trey Harris isn't getting more love. Ladd McConkey can be the alpha receiver on this team, and there's still a ton of volume behind that and really productive volume. You're attached to who I think is a top 6 quarterback in skill in the NFL behind a really ascending offensive line and a team that profiles like their defense is going to be their major problem this year. So there's going to be a lot of games where they're going to be playing to keep up.
Yeah, I think the Trey Harris stuff is not really super about him and more about just the perception of Greg Roman and Harbaugh and maybe a little bit of the stink of Quentin Johnston and just, well, this team doesn't know how to draft receivers. Why should we believe in this big, fast guy they took when they have this other big, fast guy who stinks?
Anybody remember Torrey Smith in Baltimore under Greg Roman? That was a great one.
Yeah.
And the other Harbaugh brother was the one coaching. So I think he's pretty underrated. I think between like 202 and 206 is where he should be going in most drafts.
Yep. I'm with you. Mine will not surprise you because he is on my team in our Dynasty League, but I think you and I both kind of agree here, and that is Jalen Noel. He's going late second. I think 21 overall, wide receiver 10 is what he is in Fantasy Pros right now. I would be very surprised if it turns out there are 9 receivers in this draft class who are more productive than Jalen Noel. Separation is not all that matters to being a good receiver. We mentioned catching earlier as another very key thing. And just obviously there are other route running intricacies that like Sky Moore, who had good separation scores out of college against lower competition, obviously, but like things that he just did not have clearly. But yeah, you're for breakout, Sky Moore. 84th percentile against man coverage, 64th against zone, and 55th against press. Played with Jaden Higgins, obviously, at Iowa State. Both of those guys are heading to the Texans, which is very interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen two guys who are top 2 or 3 round picks get drafted at receiver and end up at the same team.
And they have Xavier Hutchinson.
Yeah, another Iowa State guy. I'm sure I don't remember how there may not have been overlap. Hutchinson's been around for a couple of years at this point, but you look at his role in college, he was a slot receiver, and I just think he's going to slide in seamlessly into that role. Maybe not this year. I mean, Christian Kirk is there. I don't know if it'll be from day one. He's going to step right in and produce, but I think Christian Kirk is at best one and done in this offense. And at worst, from Christian Kirk's perspective, he could lose this job at some point to Jalen Noel this year, who I think is a really, really good player. I don't know if I'm not going to say he's better than Higgins, but I would say that I think those guys should be going like back to back. Like I kind of have to flip a coin. I don't really know who I would choose, how that's going to work out, who's going to end up as the wide receiver 2. I can tell you what though, Nico Collins, there's a lot more overlap with Jaden Higgins and Nico Collins. You think about what Tank Dell did in this offense, the chemistry he had with CJ Stroud, and how the deep shots out of the slot pair with Stroud's skill set. I think Noel fits that like a glove. And I sadly think Tank Dell's days as a starter are likely done, or at least likely very far away from happening again because of the injuries. So long term, I love the spot that Noel fell into here.
Yeah, well, Tank Dell lands on the PUP this early in the season means he's scheduled to miss the entire season. Him and Jonathan Brooks were 2 fantasy relevant players that happened to. Probably the coin flip reason for Higgins is just draft capital. He goes at 33 overall, first pick the Texans make. But the things I like about Noel are, one, this team had a screaming need for a short yardage wide receiver last season. And
Stephon Diggs was doing that until he got hurt.
And you look at what late career Diggs was doing. He was wide receiver 18 in points per game. He led the team in touchdowns at the time of his injury. And they were using him very creatively because they had such a bad offensive line. Short yardage runs weren't really a capability they were able to execute in the end zone. So they were doing a lot of whip routes and inside breakers to those short yardage wide receivers, which gives Noel an immediate path to doing it. I think part of the reason for getting Noel and Higgins in here is that both players can also play inside or outside, and now Nico Collins is flexible at where he can be on that. Last season, they ended up having to stick him out of X so often just because they really had nobody else playing at that position. Makes him really interesting. You have a new offensive scheme coming to Houston this season after Bobby Slowick was fired, but he profiles as the best inside receiver, and he's fighting against very oft injured now Christian Kirk, who was released by the Jaguars, who we don't know how healthy he's going to be coming into this season.
Yeah, but again, it was not going great for Christian Kirk before he got hurt last year either. I've liked him as a player, so I'm not ready to say he's just like done, but it's
end of the day,
not that guy anymore.
Houston has massive needs on the offensive line, and they're not going to pay to keep Kirk another season unless he's coming in at a really low price tag.
You wouldn't think the Texans do kind of just seem like, we don't really care about sure, let's trade Laramie Tunsil. Sure, let's let the Chiefs take the risk on maybe the LT1 at 1 pick, and we'll trade back so that the team that might take him is not there. So the Chiefs don't have to trade up for it. Sure.
Yeah, well, and they talked about this on The Athletic, but Houston retooled their offensive line, and Nate Tice or Robert Bates was like, "Are you sure that this is something you should be talking about?" He's like, "I don't know if this is a good retooling." He's like, "You threw the toolbox out, and now you don't have any tools." Is the problem in Houston? So yeah, my only concern with both those wide receivers is I am a little concerned about CJ Stroud's health for a 17-game season behind that offensive line.
Okay, on to overrated, underrated, or properly rated. We already talked about one of the guys on this list. Have a handful more here. Let's start with, I think, probably the lightning rod of this class for us, Omarion Hampton. RB2 at number 2 overall is where his ADP currently sits. Dalton, I am going to assume, based on our conversations, that we agree Omarion Hampton is overrated.
Yeah, no, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
Yeah.
For one, you talked about this just a little bit ago. We're scared of Trey Harris because of Greg Roman and Harbaugh. But we have a lot of data on these two with running backs as well. And they've never done a big dog 90% snap share running back situation. Going back to J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, there's always been this dual back approach. You bring in Omarion Hampton. I understand the draft capital's there. It's high draft capital. But we're also avoiding some like major concerns. One, they did nothing to revamp the inside of the offensive line, which was the issue with the Chargers last season. Omarion Hampton comes from a gap-heavy scheme, which relies heavily on good interior guards. And then we're all assuming that a guy who's had 1,000 yards for 4 straight seasons is washed.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, Najee Harris is in his mid-20s. If I told you that Omarion Hampton is going to have the Najee Harris cycle of fantasy value, where it goes overrated, a little overrated, properly rated, and then very underrated in like a 4 or 5 year span, you might say, yeah, I can see that. I kind of think that we're just at the beginning of the Najee Harris cycle in all aspects. Like, I think this is a good but not great running back. Like, if I said to you, I think this is maybe just a little bit more explosive Tyler Algier, you would say...
I'd say that feels pretty right.
Which is a perfectly good player. There's just other running backs I like more, and other running backs who frankly landed in more clear situations, like just right off the bat, than Omarion Hampton.
Yeah, well, and his ADP on Underdog right now is RB 17. It's incredibly high.
God.
And I understand that what happened with Najee Harris is exactly what you described. People got too crazy about him. But then he also spent 4 years in Pittsburgh behind bad offensive lines and bad offenses, and every year was one of the most consistent running backs you could ask for. He doesn't have major breakaway speed, but he gets the job done. He runs effectively. He gets you the yards you need. And that's the biggest concern for Omarion Hampton. He's coming into 2 really old school coaches who are going to be like, don't bounce that outside. Take the 3-yard gain, set us up on 2nd and 7 so we can run play action. And if he doesn't do those things quickly, the community is going to be really upset because Najee Harris will do those every play.
Well, and I know Waldman has like his kind of like his Mendoza line, like the ball security line. If you're under that, you're screwed, basically. He's not under that, but he is close to that. And that is something that we could see come into play at some point this year or even next year.
Yeah. And if this is, I don't see this being anything better for Omarion Hampton than a 50-50 split. And what I really believe is going to happen is Omarion Hampton is the between the 20s player, and Najee Harris gobbles up all the fantasy value. The only thing that both these players leave to be desired is pass catching. And if Omarion Hampton can get better at that and be the player to do that, but Najee Harris is also a really damn good pass blocker and pick up pass protections. So it's really hard for me to get a vision for where Omarion Hampton hits his value in his first season. And we're just going a little overboard with the draft capital and with 2 seasons at North Carolina, when Najee Harris had 2 very similar seasons at Alabama against better competition. And we did the same thing with him in his draft cycle.
Thinking about Najee Harris as a pass catcher, I just can't help but remember and laugh about that Big Ben game where Najee had like 14 receptions or whatever it was.
And it was like 40 yards.
Oh, one of the funniest games of all time. Like I'm just seeing Najee catching the ball 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage in my brain right now. Okay, the next guy who is a pass catcher is explosive, so kind of the opposite of these guys, and got, I think, better draft capital than a lot of people thought, is RJ Harvey. The RB4, number 6 overall player, lands in Denver with Sean Payton. We know what Sean Payton can do with these types of running backs. I personally have had a really tough time with this one because he wasn't my favorite, but he wasn't my least favorite. Not that Hampton was like my least favorite, but like I didn't have a strong take on him either way. So I'm struggling a little bit. I'm gonna err on the side of just a tad overrated because I'm not sold this is like an every down guy, and I don't know if the grand expectation is that, because I think we all kind of know what a Sean Payton led backfield can look like. But if you're going as the RB4 in this class, I kind of want to take a guy who I think can be an every down back in the NFL, because I think there are guys who fit that, and I'm just not sure. I do like the player enough, like explosive running back, top 10 in the FBS and forced missed tackles last year, a very skilled pass catcher, one of 3 running backs in this class to have at least 19 catches and at least a 1.25 yards per route run each of the last 2 years. So I'm sure he'll produce. I don't think he's going to like bust out or bust for you at the number 6 pick in your draft if you take him. But I think if you do take him, you might wish you maybe took a closer look at a Quinshon Judkins or a Caleb Johnson or even like a Cam Scatabo at that spot instead.
Yeah. It's a tough one for me too, because I see everybody's vision. I understand the overall expectations.
I mean, how many times are we going to hear the name Reggie Bush in the next 3 months when we talk about this guy?
If you read, first of all, did you know Reggie Bush never had 1,000 yards under Sean Payton? I was going to get into that here in a minute.
No, but I'm not shocked just because he was a dual threat guy.
Yeah.
So,
I
mean, Kamara never had 1,000 yards under Sean Payton, I don't think.
If you're like, no, he didn't. Which also, thank you for getting to my point for me. First, if you type in Bucky Irving, RJ Harvey on Twitter, this year's Bucky Irving is RJ Harvey. Okay, my problem, I have him as overrated slightly because it is a good landing spot. We, for 3 seasons now, have been hoodwinked a little bit by Sean Payton. Marvin Mims, Sean Payton's first pick in Denver. This guy is going to be his Marcus Colston, his Brandon Cooks. That was a lie. Last season, they take Blake Watson as an undrafted free agent, and then Sean Payton comes out and says he has a lot of things that remind me of Alvin Kamara. Blake Watson didn't do anything for us last year. And then you have the history of Sean Payton, which has always been this dual back, double approach, very frustrating for fantasy managers. You have Mark Ingram, you have Alvin Kamara, you have the Reggie Bush situation. He's not a guy who's ever run an offense that is a single back. And that's the expectations we're putting around Harvey right now, which is concerning. Same time, he's a converted quarterback to running back. I'm not saying he did bad things down at UCF, but he was a player that consistently looked to break outside and go for the big wins. And those you don't get away with in the NFL. And those are frustrating for a head coach when you're running behind one of the best pass blocking units in the NFL in this Denver Broncos offensive line. You still have Jaleel McLaughlin, who I think they're pretty committed to getting touches to because he's been a pretty good player for them. And we're also, and we do
Audric Estime is still
Audric Estime, who was also a player a lot of people were excited about just a year ago. I remember the training camp highlights. Everybody was tweeting out when there were no pads on. And also, we do this every season. they had a really good season last year offensively, and the expectation of the entire community is well, they have to get better.
Yeah.
That didn't work for the Houston Texans. That usually doesn't play out when a second-year quarterback has all of their film on tape and the objectives of defenses change with a full year to prepare for those teams.
Yeah, and just growth is rarely linear. Like
Yes.
it rarely just happens where a guy just gets better and better and better every year. Now,
Yeah, especially when
sometimes
you're
it does.
27 already, or however old Bo Nix is.
Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it does not.
So we're just making saying this is a great offensive environment to land in. Objectively, in my opinion, is not true. This team is bereft of a wide receiver one. Their offensive line is strong, and their quarterback got by last year by a lot of rushing and a lot of rushing touchdowns to
Yeah,
help buoy this offense.
and Cortland Sutton is a good player. Bo Nix, I think, far exceeded our expectations last year, so credit to him for that. I don't want to be too harsh on Bo Nix because I think we were pretty clearly haters at the beginning of the season last year, and he proved us wrong from a fantasy perspective. But you just think to that Bills playoff game, and it kind of felt like a typical wild card. Like this 7 seed has no chance to win because the quarterback isn't good enough, and he was a rookie. He's old, but he was a rookie, so maybe he'll get better. But I'm with you. I'm not ready to just pencil in this, Bo Nix, Sean Payton offense to be some great environment this year. It may be, but I'm not ready to just pencil that in because there are very few environments that we know that to be true of year in, year out.
Yeah, exactly. And we're just making a lot of assumptions about how this is going to work out when Devon Vele or Marvin Mims is the wide receiver 2, and we just think this offense is going to get more productive.
Mm-hmm. Next guy up, Cam Scatabo, RB7, number 11 overall player. Dalton, can I just ask you a question off the top? Omarion Hampton and Cam Scatabo, what is the actual difference without talking about draft capital between these two players? Why is Hampton viewed in such a more favorable light?
I have an answer I'll give you offline, and I have an answer I'll give you online.
Okay.
Breakaway speed.
Yeah.
It is the biggest hang up in why Scatabo went later. Scatabo doesn't have high-end breakaway speed. I do question.
I'm not sure that Hampton does either, but it's just better than Scatabo's.
I do question the overemphasis on both the NFL teams and fantasy drafters on how important that really is in today's NFL, and how often we see that come to fruition with players who have high breakaway speed. But I think that is the number one. I have him as properly rated for what it's worth. What I will say is Cam Scatabo is second in a ton of advanced metrics to Ashton Jeanty in breakaways, in total team yardage.
I mean, he rushed for 1,800 yards last year.
Yeah. And the biggest concerns with him are breakaway speed. And then there are a lot of smart people who say he runs a way that won't work in the NFL. I don't know if that's true or not. He runs aggressively. He runs guys down. He plays very old school NFL ball that he always lowers the helmet and looks for first contact. Mm-hmm. But it's also something I think some coaches could like and could be maybe a Jordan Howard-esque player in his career.
Yeah, I mean, he gets a David Montgomery comp from Waldman, and if he were to live up to that, that would obviously be fantastic value for where he's going. I have underrated ever so slightly. I think it's a bit uncertain early on because I do think Tyrone Tracy is a good player. I also think that the kind of like you said with Warren and Caleb Johnson, I think these two guys' skill sets actually mesh really well together. And they're both, I mean, we'll see if the Giants offense allows it, but someday maybe it will. And if it does, I think both these guys have the skill sets where both can be good, usable running backs for real life and fantasy football. Like he's a good power back, better ball security than Hampton. Like just a tough runner. You mentioned it. Definitely not the breakaway speed guy, but Tyrone Tracy can be kind of more of that jitterbug, electric guy out of the backfield here. So I like the player. I don't hate the landing spot. I mean, he may not be in the best offense, but he does, I think, have a pretty clear path to 10 to 15 touches a game as a rookie. And then if he has a good rookie season, like he could easily build off that. And I could see him being the RB25 as we go into next year. You know, he's RB25 and Tracy's RB29 in the ranks next year. I could totally see that if the quarterback sit like, who knows how good Dart will be. Like, maybe this is the best Giants situation, sans the one magical Daniel Jones season under Brian Daboll's first year. Like maybe this turns into the best situation the Giants have had in a decade. Like it could be.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say if you're drafting Scatabo and you're expecting him to get 80% of the shares and beat Tyrone Tracy, I think you're going to be pretty upset. It got clear as the season went on that Tyrone Tracy doesn't have a full year's workload in him. 9 of his 10 fumbles came after the halfway point of the season. Mm-hmm. He got fumbleitis. He wore down. His stats declined as the season went on.
And he had the devastating fumble in the international game that lost in the game to, I think, Carolina.
Yes. Not to say he's a bad player, but to say that he's not a player who warrants like a 20, 25 touch workload. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, this is a smaller converted receiver who is a very good runner, but like you are probably better off not giving him 20 touches in a game.
Yeah, and that could be a great use for him where he's a James White-esque back that's really productive for you in fantasy, gets you your points, but you're not getting 15 to 18 useless touches out of him a game, and instead he's being a very productive player in their passing attempt. The last thing, probably the differences in ADP is if you told me to blind rank 2 rookies who had similar stats and one was in LA and one was in New York, regardless of which LA team and New York team, I would put the LA players a full round ahead of the other ones.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, Matthew Golden, we talked about. I think we can probably skip unless you have anything else to add.
Well, last thing on Scatabo.
Okay.
He chose 44. Last Giants running back to wear 44 was Ahmad Bradshaw, who had 1 RB1 finish in it, 2 RB2 finishes, and RB3 finish in it. So I'm not
pretty similar type of runner to like just violent.
Honestly,
like had a pretty short career because he did things you probably should not do as a player in the NFL if you're trying to have a decently long career at running back. So there's a lot of comps there.
There are a lot of commonalities there. So Scatabo to the Scatamoon.
Okay. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver 4, number 10 overall. Dalton, you wanted to add him. He was not on my initial list, but you wanted to add him, so I'll let you go first. What is your Emeka Egbuka take?
I wanted to add him because I'm a little annoyed about the discourse around him. I'm going to say overrated, just a tad bit.
Okay, I've got him properly rated.
I think he's going a little too high. Right now, the discourse is, oh, remember JSN, remember Roma Dunze. We said they were going into crowded wide receiver rooms, and now look, one, we're already projecting Roma Dunze just to skyrocket up and get really good, which I don't think is an expectation we should have, and we'll talk a little bit more about later when we do Luther Burden. But 2, I don't think Emeka Egbuka is as strong of a prospect as either of these guys. I would have Emeka closer to like 110, 111. We're making a lot of assumptions about this Bucs team, which one is that Mike Evans is nearing the end of his career, which could totally be possible. Do not see any inclinations from his play on the field that he's even near that. And 2, that Chris Godwin, who they just re-signed to a contract, is not going to return to form.
3 years, 66 million, 44 million guaranteed. Looked it up before this podcast for this exact conversation, obviously.
What I do think happened with this pick is the Bucs said, we went 4 games without Mike Evans or Chris Godwin and ran the offense through Kate Otten and went 0-4, and we need to insulate from that.
Yeah.
And they did the smart thing and took a player who was falling and had value in the fall and just took best player available. All of that is fine. From a redraft perspective, I question your thought-making process if you're taking him right now where his ADP is, which an underdog is in the 12th round, going around players like Romeo Dobbs, but really expecting anything out of him this season is questionable. And then I do question if you're drafting him and saying 2 years from now, or a year from now, we're actually going to be talking about him as the wide receiver 1 on this Bucs offense, because a lot of things need to happen. And I don't see many of those things happening short term for a Bucks team that has a pretty tight core, unless Mike Evans comes out and is completely useless. But we've seen Devontae Adams late into his career continue to be a very productive player. And I don't think him and Mike Evans are too far apart when it comes to quality of skill at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I would maybe put Evans. Or
I would put Evans higher, definitely.
No, I would put Adams higher than Evans.
That's what I meant. Adams higher than Evans.
Yeah, I mean, I struggled with Igbokwe too. I put properly rated just because at the end of the day, like, I think I'd probably take him 10 overall in a dynasty league if I had that pick, like around there at least. Like, I would take Luther Burden, who's a couple spots lower ahead of him, but that's probably about it, really. As far as guys, right in that range. Mike Evans complicates it a little bit, but it's really the Chris Godwin thing that complicates it because Igbokwe profiles as a pretty purely inside guy. I think even more so than JSN. I feel JSN maybe had a little more versatility to his game than Igbokwe coming out of college. JSN probably a little bit better prospect than Igbokwe coming out of college, but I don't know. Like, I think this is a guy that, again, I'm not expecting much out of this year unless there are injuries. If there are injuries, that could be a different story. In a year or two, though, I could totally see him being one of the best couple of receivers in this class because I do think he's a good player. I just don't think he is like a JSN or a Rome Odunze type of guy, but I think in comparison to the other guys in this range, I would still probably be okay with him at number 10 overall, knowing that you could maybe get 75% of like Puka Nacua, because that's kind of the guy he profiles similarly to. He just doesn't quite have the upside that Puka does, obviously.
Yeah, I think some logo scouting did occur with Emeka, which is, well, he played at Ohio State, and we know what those wide receivers do. I will have a wild take for you. We're not talking about him today, so I'll say it. Luther Burden would be an easy draft over for me when it comes to Emeka. I don't think there's any question for me in that one. But if I was at 112 and you told me I had to take a wide receiver, there were no other options, I would likely highly consider taking Kyle Williams over Emeka. I think I would probably do that 9 times out of 10. So I would put him closer to wide receiver 6 or 7 in this class at this point, based on landing spot and then based on where I see this Bucks team going over the next couple of years.
Yep. We'll kind of breeze through. I know we're running a little bit close to an hour here. We've got some guys left. We'll lightning round through a couple of these here. Luther Burden, wide receiver 6, 13 overall, fell out of the first round of the NFL draft. As Chiefs fans can attest to, earlier in the season, it was like, oh, there's no way Luther Burden will be there at your pick. And then it turns out the Chiefs pass on Luther Burden at their pick.
Did get a franchise left tackle.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying necessarily anything on that pick, just that like Luther Burden was a pretty consensus like top 15 pick in the draft if you ask people in November, and he ends up going 30 whatever to the Chicago Bears a couple months later. 68, 55, and 59th percentile against man, zone, and press, respectively. He's just a tough scout because I know the effort was a little bit inconsistent at Missouri. I also think a lot of people would tell you that he was pretty rightly frustrated a lot because he was open and not getting the ball. And so that can just be kind of what you have to sift through when you're watching some of these receivers play with these not good college quarterbacks and these poorly run college offenses. I think people are not projecting his route running out the way that they should. Like, a lot of people look at the, how many of his yards came off of catches behind the line of scrimmage and blah, blah, blah. This is a dude that got a Brandon Ayuk comp from JJ Zacharyson, and JJ Zacharyson, or Brandon Ayuk, excuse me, those were a lot of the same things that were said about him coming out of college. Yak merchant, gadget guy, that's where he's going to be. Turns out he had a lot more to him, and I kind of think Luther Burden is a guy who may also have a lot more to him, just based on like me watching him run routes and others like Matt Waldman having him as his number one receiver ahead of even Travis Hunter pre-draft.
Yeah, and JJ had the highest ZAP score pre-draft he ever had on a player on Luther Burden, which is his model that includes things like athleticism, college production. It went down because draft capital impacted it, so he didn't end up being the highest. But also, he was the only offensive option for Missouri, and they likely were saying, let's just get the ball in his hands however we can. I understand the effort concerns and people calling that out. He also lands on a team. It's very funny because this team's coach, Ben Johnson, is already calling out the effort of other players on that roster. He's competing not for the wide receiver 1 position, but certainly for a ton of reps with DJ Moore, who literally sat on a bench mid-play last season. Like just gave up. Got a contract extension from the Bears and then went and trashed them in the media.
Yeah, I mean, highest paid receiver in franchise history.
Yes. Does all of that, and you have a coach openly criticizing and saying we're going to reevaluate all the effort here. And our concern is Luther Burden's effort when he hasn't played on an NFL roster and played last year on a Missouri team that had high expectations and got absolutely trounced in those expectations when their starting quarterback went down. Amazing route runner. I mean, in my opinion, I think he's the best wide receiver of this draft class. I think he's better than McMillan. I think he's right there with Travis Hunter.
I would have Travis Hunter pretty soundly ahead of him, but for me, I think just purely if you're just talking about skill on the field, he'd be number 2.
Yeah. And I mean, I know it's a crowded room, but landing in a Ben Johnson offense and an ascending offense and really being one of the first picks of this franchise in what we consider to be a real franchise-altering coaching staff change on a coach who was on the hot seat for 2 seasons that people wanted him. I just think that Luther Burden's really going to perform above expectations. And right now his ADP on underdog is in the 9th round. So some people are seeing it already. Yeah. But I just really like Luther Burden. I think he's underrated by far.
Yep. Me too. Okay. Jaden Higgins, we kind of talked about him a little bit with Noel. We talked about a little bit more here. Wide receiver 5, 12 overall. I think properly rated. And like I said, I just think that he and his teammate Noel should be a lot closer, probably back to back. He maybe gets hurt a little bit by landing spot. Not that it's not good, but just that I'm a little less like, will he be the power slot? Will he be outside? Will he be moving around? Like Noel, I know he's going to be in the slot, but he can also move around. Whereas like Higgins, I just am a little less certain on what exactly his role will look like. Not that he won't have a role, just unsure of what it'll actually look like. But this is a good player. Could be the number 2 in this offense. If not that, will certainly be the number 3. And I think there's enough value to go around long-term in this offense with those guys. He's a big guy, so people are going to say he doesn't separate, but he does. Like, he's a pretty good route runner, pretty good separator. Good player, good draft capital, good situation. Like, I think he is very much properly rated here.
Yeah, I've properly rated. I don't have a strong opinion on him. I think this team needs a wide receiver 2, and he can very well fit it. Just like last year, I do have a ton of concerns about this Texans offense with kind of what Houston's doing with that offense. They clearly tried to improve it at the wide receiver position, but completely ignored the offensive line. CJ Stroud was 3rd in the NFL last year in hits taken among all quarterbacks. And you're asking him to do that again for a guy that doesn't have a ton of mobility, but properly rated for Higgins, a good player coming out of Iowa State with a really good quarterback, being that this offense can function properly and run the way they want to.
Okay, Tyler Warren, I think we talked about him plenty off the top. Overrated, mostly because of landing spot, not the player. Back to Chicago here for our last guy, Dalton, and Colston Loveland. He is the tight end 2 and number 16 overall.
Yeah, going back to my same comments I had about Luther Burden for Colston Loveland, which is that this coaching staff was very upset with some of the things they saw on the field with the previous coaching staff and how the players responded. Another one of them was Cole Kmet, who got an extension from the Bears and did the same thing DJ Moore did. He came out, he trashed the Chicago Bears organization. Also, you go back and you watch a few of Cole Kmet's blocking. He definitely gave up on a ton of blocks, definitely gave up a few sacks. He is the second highest tight end in sacks credited to when he was lined up on the offensive line. And I don't think Cole Kmet's a bad blocker. I think Cole Kmet wasn't given a lot of work. I think Ben Johnson and this new coaching staff made it very clear no one has a spot on this roster. Going into Michigan had 50 more pass yards per game when Colson Loveland was on the field. He's a very talented pass catcher. I think he's in the same tier as Tyler Warren. The difference I have between the two is I think he could very quickly get to a starting spot. Taking him in round 2 as a first-round pick, I think he's perfectly rated where he's at. He's not going to be like a Trey McBride player where we're really expecting a lot, but one of those 8 to 1,000-yard and 5 touchdowns tight ends over his careers is right where he belongs.
Yeah, I'm saying slightly underrated because I would consider him at like 111, 112 in drafts. He was targeted. This stat is from Fantasy Life. He was targeted on nearly 40% of his routes in 2024. That's the highest single season rate recorded by a tight end during the time that this data is available, which is 2017 to 2024. So you think of guys like a Trey McBride, a Sam Laporta, a TJ Hawkinson. Don't laugh at this name, but this is the prospect, not the NFL player, Kyle Pitts. Throw him in that bucket too. Like, this guy has elite receiving production. And I think purely as a receiver, I think there were some people who are starting to come around to he is actually probably the better pure receiver of those two top tight ends. Just Warren had maybe a little bit more other stuff to him that Loveland may not. But I think underrated. I mean, we're probably going to see a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends on the field, I would assume, based on it's Ben Johnson and based on they invested pretty heavily in a tight end who I think is pretty good.
Yeah. And I
think Cole Kmet is just a guy too.
I do. I think he could be the tight end 1 for that team by the end of this season.
Yeah. Okay. Real quickly before we get out of here, we got to talk about a couple of the vets impacted by this stuff. Let's go a 1 winner and 1 loser from the draft. I'll start us off with a loser so we can end on a high note. I think one of the very clear losers, this is like the most low-hanging fruit that there is here.
Say who I want to say, I will kill you.
Who you want to say?
Ramondre Stevenson.
Yeah, it's Ramondre Stevenson. So we both have the same one here. Like, the team, let's just say, did not speak glowingly about Ramondre last year. And you thought maybe like new coach, we'll see what happens. Oh, crap. They just drafted Travion Henderson in the second round, right? Pretty early second round. So you've got draft capital, and also like I clearly think Travion Henderson is better than like Omarion Hampton, for example. Like I think if I were ranking the running backs, I've really struggled with which Ohio State guy to put second, but it's one of those two. It's either Judkins or Henderson, 2 or 3.
Yeah,
in this draft.
I have Henderson higher because I have high expectations. I think the Patriots are a sneaky good offensive team that could be better this year than we're expecting. With Cleveland, it's just I
mean that QB depth chart is just unbelievable.
You got 5
and not in the way you want it to be. Unbelievable. I mean, the thing with Ramondre, he was playing behind Antonio Gibson at points last season because he just would not stop fumbling. And honestly, you know, a lot of times you're happy when your guy gets paid. That might low-key be one of the worst things about this. If you're a Ramondre Stevenson dynasty owner, you're kind of trapped. Like he's there. He's probably there at least this year, maybe next year. His out with 0 dead cap, if they cut him, comes after the 2026 season. So I would assume probably at that point, if things keep trending as they are, he is not a Patriot. But I think we're kind of at worst case where you have a guy who he's had ball security issues. You have a new regime who invests very highly in a very talented player. And Ramondre is now kind of stuck in this spot for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah. And after that, he's hitting the dead zone for running backs where it's game over for him. For most running backs, especially somebody where he's kind of a middling talent at times.
Yeah, if he comes off of a couple of years of not much production, like what kind of opportunity does he get past that? So I think there's a very real chance that the days of Ramondre Stevenson mattering more than like a flex play are done. Like I think there's a very real chance we've hit that point.
Yeah, I got another loser here I could mention who was my honorable mention.
Okay.
And I feel like we have to play the content game here a little bit, Evan, and we've done a poor job of it. But I have Travis Etienne, who Bichal Tootin was taken by the Jacksonville Jaguars. The only reason I bring it up, ignoring recent Twitter events, I'm not.
You bring it up because he's already been inducted to the Hall of Fame. Wow, unbelievable!
But it is funny that James Gladstone, the GM for the Jaguars, when he was in his interview, he was like, "Yeah, Bichal Tootin is the kind of player I could see this team taking," and then he ends up getting him in the draft. But no, still think Etienne's a bit of a loser because I don't think that spot's his regardless. But I don't.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not ruling out Etienne, who is the only one of these guys with a elite NFL season under his belt, being, I'm not saying like the guy, but kind of winning that job to some extent. I'm not guaranteeing it by any means, but I definitely am not ruling it out. And I've actually started to see some pro Travis Etienne pushback lately because I mean this has been all over the place trying to gauge what this backfield is going to be.
Are you seeing that on True Social or where are you seeing that?
on the forums, Dalton? The thing that I think maybe makes you feel like Etienne isn't such a loser is because it really looked like Ashton Jeanty was heading to Jacksonville for a little bit. You're hearing offensive weapon. You're not really thinking, oh, trade up for Travis Hunter. You're thinking, oh God, they're taking Ashton Jeanty. And so this year is like a completely lost year for Travis Etienne. So at least it's not to that degree. Whereas like now, I think it's kind of open season for who could have that. It could be any of those three guys as the lead guy, and I would not be shocked. And I don't think anybody would be too shocked.
Yeah, no, me neither. And just for everybody listening, like the floor for Tootin is he is a special teams player who can't hold on to the ball. The ceiling is he starts for them and learns to hold on to the ball. Insane range of outcomes. And if you're taking him in the first round, which I've seen some people starting to infer, please go outside, touch some grass, think about your decision-making process, and go back to the board. He's a mid to late second round pick with some upside.
Yeah. Winners. We've talked about this team twice in the last couple of minutes here, but I think Caleb Williams is one of the very clear winners of this draft season, or just, I mean, of the offseason, if you want to extend it out. I mean, he gets sacked 68 times, by far the most in the NFL last year. CJ Stroud was second at 52. I will say, and we've talked about this, sacks are partially a quarterback stat. So part of that was certainly his fault. And part of that was like their O-line at times looked completely overwhelmed. Like I will never forget that Texans game on prime time early in the season where I actually worried for Caleb Williams' life in that game. And then CJ Stroud kind of tried to, do the arm around you thing afterwards, and Caleb was not having it. But they add Joe Thuney via trade, Joe Jackson via trade. They signed Drew Dalman. They draft another guy in the second round. They add two weapons who I am very excited about in Luther Burden and Colston Loveland. You add a head coach who I think we all feel very confident in the system he is going to put in place. There's no excuses for Caleb Williams in year two. Like, not to say he has to be amazing, but you have to show progress. You have to show, legitimate NFL quarterback stuff on a consistent basis this year because the foundation is there. There are no excuses. The only thing you could say is, but it'd be nice if they had a little bit of better running back. But the running back situation is good enough. The system is going to be good enough to where everything is in place for Caleb Williams to be a good player. It's just up to him at this point.
Yeah, back-to-back seasons, the fantasy community is really all in on a quarterback in Chicago. Couldn't go wrong. Never seen a quarterback in Chicago play poorly. But legitimately, this team's offense could not be in a better place and could not have any fewer reasons to make excuses, which only means something disastrous is going to happen to the Chicago Bears before the season starts. Because they do have, for the second year in a row, I would like to crown them the Los Angeles Chargers champion, which is the team that wins the preseason, and the Bears have definitely done it.
Kind of low key. I would love for them to sign a former Charger in J.K. Dobbins. I would actually feel a lot better
That would be
about the running back room if Dobbins was there instead of
Yes.
like Swift and then some rookies and Bijan's former backup at Texas.
Yeah, not a good situation. My winner, I went with, just like you, in a second year player. I went with Drake May.
Yeah.
I loved the Patriots draft. They've bolstered their offensive line to give Drake May protection.
You like their little short-armed offensive lineman?
I'll send you the video later, but there's somebody that's like, it's a whole TikTok where she's like, my husband's more into the NFL drafted players than he is about himself. And they're like, how big are Will Campbell's arms? And it's like 32 3/4 inches.
What about the hand measurements?
But they add Travion Henderson, who I think, other than Genty, was my favorite running back in this draft. They add Kyle Williams, who's my favorite sleeper wide receiver in this draft. They go out, they bring in Josh McDaniels and Mike Vrabel, two very tenured coaches. I think Josh McDaniels is a very good OC. I think he's a very terrible head coach.
It's so funny here. And I get what you're saying. I agree with you. It's just so funny hearing you say anything positive about Josh McDaniels.
I hate him.
It's like jarring to my brain right now.
And you get Mike Vrabel in that room. You don't have this circus that was running it last year.
Yeah.
And I mean, Drake May was throwing to Austin Hooper as his number one weapon. They've added Stephon Diggs. That offense, I think, is going to be sneaky good.
Demario Douglas still there and like a pretty solid little player.
Yeah. Well, and this is a fun stat I found. Jalen Polk, start the season, caught 6 of his 6 first targets. Following 24 targets to him, he got 6 of it total.
It was tough last year.
It was terrible. You add Stephon Diggs, you add Kyle Williams. I think that entire offense is up to be middle of the pack, which says a lot because they were bottom of the pack for most of the season and doing really well, all things considered, for how that team's season played out.
It's really quite sad that this is all coming at the same time as the death of Ramondre Stevenson, because this is what we always hoped for Ramondre Stevenson in the last couple of years, and it turns out it just is all coming at his expense.
They expect one of us in the plane, brother, and it is Ramondre.
I'm with you though. I think the Patriots are in a good spot. I like Kyle Williams and Jalen Noel were my 2 receivers kind of in that range that I liked a lot. So I like that pickup. We'll see Stephon Diggs. I think it's going to have to be a kind of Christian Kirk thing where you have to separate the player from the contract. I think the contract is going to be an overpay based on a guy his age coming off the ACL, but he will be helpful and an additive for this offense, I think. And I'm with you. I love Travion Henderson too. And Drake May showed a lot last year, I'd say. I'd say you're probably a little more in on him than me, but you're more of a Josh Allen guy than me too. So that makes all the sense in the world there.
I kind of thought Drake May should be over Caleb Williams last year, and you like Caleb Williams more. And now,
yeah, I don't know if I ever really like. I guess I definitely had Caleb Williams ranked higher. That was not like an intense debate that we had though, because I mean Drake May was not starting week 1, and Caleb, like I think it was one of those where we just kind of like, put him 15. It's fine.
Yeah, I hid my Drake May love for a little while. I do blame Matt Waldman for that one.
yeah, he really hated Drake May. All right, Dalton, that is going to do it for episode 172 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube at Half Point Per Podcast. All of those things will be in the show notes. As always, leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again somewhat soon.